Welcome back to The Explainer. So, today we're tracing the blueprint of an absolute giant. We're talking about a massive, completely invisible financial entity that touches, well, literally everything in our daily lives. Just imagine a company that owns a piece of everything you interact with from the second you wake up. You check your smartphone, they own a piece of it. You drive your car to go grab a coffee, yeah, they own a piece of both the car manufacturer and the coffee chain. We are diving into the ghost in the machine of global capitalism.
And to understand them, we have to start with this absolutely massive number, $10 trillion in managed assets. It's a number so wildly staggering that our human brains honestly have a hard time even conceptualizing it. To put it into perspective, as the source text highlights, $10 trillion is actually more than the gross domestic product of Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom combined. We're talking about a scale of wealth and influence that literally rivals and often totally surpasses entire continents.
And this perfectly illustrates their global reach. The source material provocatively calls them the fourth branch of government. But what's truly fascinating here is their anonymity. I mean, despite these deep, interconnected global ties, if you asked 100 people on the street right now who runs this company, 99 of them wouldn't even recognize the name, let alone understand what they actually do. But despite that total invisibility, they own pieces of your iPhone, your Tesla, and there's a very solid chance they even own a stake in your corporate landlord. They are everywhere, just hiding right in plain sight.
So, let's formally kick off part one, the $10 trillion ghost.
Because if BlackRock were a country, it would be the third largest economy on Earth. Think about that for a second. But an empire of this unimaginable, globe-spanning scale, it doesn't just appear out of thin air, right? To really grasp how this shadow economy operates, we need to peel back the layers. We need to go back to the very beginning to understand how one single individual took a massive, devastating failure and built this entire empire from the ground up.
Which brings us to part two, the ledger of Larry Fink.
According to our source, back in the mid-1980s, Larry Fink was practically the king of First Boston. He was this absolute pioneer of the mortgage-backed security, which, as the text notes, was the exact same financial instrument that would eventually help melt down the entire global economy in 2008. But in the late 80s, Fink's luck ran out in a pretty spectacular way. He made a disastrous bet on interest rates and ended up losing $100 million. He was promptly fired. But rather than retreating, getting fired sparked an absolute obsession within him. Cut to 1988, and he founds BlackRock in a single, one-room office driven entirely by his intense new fixation on calculating risk. Now, what's really interesting here is how that specific failure fundamentally rewired him. The source notes that his $100 million mistake drove him to build a completely new kind of system. He realized the problem wasn't the trade itself, actually. The problem was not truly understanding the underlying risk. So he didn't just want to build a regular company that bought stocks. No, he wanted to build a brain, a system that could meticulously calculate the risk of every single asset on the planet.
And that leads us to part three, Aladdin, the digital god.
So, what is Aladdin? Well, it's essentially an AI oracle. It monitors a staggering $20 trillion in global assets just to calculate and predict financial risk. The source text impartially refers to this system as the financial alchemy of the 21st century. It's not just some fancy spreadsheet, it is a massive predictive engine designed to see exactly how the world's interconnected financial threads pull on one another. The sheer scale of the data Aladdin processes is honestly incredible. It literally knows when a storm in Taiwan is going to affect the price of a microchip in Detroit. It monitors how political protests in France might ripple out and suddenly impact a pension fund in Ohio. And because of this unparalleled mapping of global risk, when the 2008 financial crisis hit, the US government didn't actually know how to map out the mess themselves. They had to rely on this exact system. They brought in BlackRock to manage the toxic assets for giants like Bear Stearns and AIG.
And I just love his quote from the source material. It describes the government's 2008 bailout efforts as, quote, patching the Titanic with $100 bills. During that chaotic time, the text highlights that Larry Fink was the one providing the crucial glue to actually hold the collapsing financial system together. This was the exact pivot point where BlackRock transitioned from being just a wildly successful private company into something resembling a public utility, basically the entity the government calls when the global economy is sinking.
Now for our final section, part 4, the illusion of choice. This brings us to what the source provocatively terms the rot or the biggest lie. It's this idea that your consumer choice, like when you're just walking down the aisle of your local supermarket, is merely an illusion.
When you look at shelves packed with supposedly fiercely competing products, the source asks us to step back and reconsider what competition actually means when you trace the money all the way back up the ladder.
Just take a look at these supposed rivals. We've got Coke versus Pepsi, Apple versus Microsoft. These brands appear to be at absolute war with each other for your loyalty and, of course, your dollars. But when you look at the major shareholders, as the text points out, BlackRock is usually the largest, or at least the second largest, shareholder on both sides of the aisle. They hold massive stakes in almost every major company in the S&P 500. They don't need to completely buy out a company to win. They just own a piece of everyone who's playing the game.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question from the source material. If one invisible giant owns a piece of every competing brand on the shelf, do we really have a choice at all? It's a fascinating concept to ponder the next time you're scanning the brands in your own home or reading the financial news. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and never stop looking closely at the structures around you.